Hey, creative listeners, how are you? I am so excited to introduce you to Kate Clark. Now, this episode took years in the making because I first learned of Kate's work because fell in love with them. She was making Venus of Willendorf petite ceramic sculptures, but each one was wearing a different pair of shoes. And I was like, yes, you don't know what it's like to be them unless you've walked a mile in their shoes. It just lent this idea of compassion and empathy like right away, especially in the female form and its subjectivity. So she has a very creative blend of archaeology with her artwork. She's been commissioned by the Seattle Convention Center. In the episode, we're going to talk about what it means to be a creative entrepreneur and all these other things. This episode took years in the making because she and I both had tons of life happening to finally meet. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Kate Clark. Kate, sister, thank you so much for saying yes and coming on Female Frequency Podcast because the listeners, I got to tell you, she and I have been trying to get together for probably 2 years, I think.
True.
And
It's
life
true.
has happened. And now I get to meet in person. I mean, on Zoom here.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, she's a lot younger than I thought.
What did you think? Out
I'm
of curiosity.
probably a little bit closer to my age. I'm pushing 50. Yeah.
I like the idea of you thinking of assuming I was like in full crone mode. 'Cause sometimes I
Yeah.
feel that way. Like I lose track of I can't remember how old I am. I have to like really be like, okay, how it's all relative.
It is. The way that you talk about your work, I love your vernacular. And to me, it just had like this sage vantage point from it. And I
Hmm.
thought maybe it was just coming from, yeah, the crone. But I love that this generation of yours is rocking it and is so curious about the female form because we both love Venus of Willendorf. And that's how I
Yes.
discovered your work. Our girl Natalie Niblack introduced me. She's like, you got to meet Kate because she's doing these Venus sculptures. And so of course I'm like, "Burp, let me let me see everything and just talk about the form and its full expression." So, hi.
Hello.
In dust we trust. How did you come up with this tagline?
My mom actually came up with it. She's smart. She's was an English teacher, very literary lady, and I was like, Mom, okay, I'm doing this public art project, and I want to have a tagline that's, kind of talking about like trusting and the detritus, the dust of, the remnants of our lives and our public spaces and kind of old feeling and she was like, how about in dust we trust?
It's so good. So was parkeology, that's more of your public art facing because you have definitely have a studio practice and a public art practice. So was was that in itself a public art project?
Yeah, it was. And I still use it actually in a way just like as an LLC because I've somehow ended up as like an independent business owner, which was not my intent. It's like with being an artist, but like I guess that's what I had to do. And once I started getting public art commissions, you get shoehorned into
Yeah.
like serving all these roles that you didn't expect. But Archaeology started when I was living in San Diego in Balboa and doing a lot of work in Balboa Park, which is this 1,200-acre park that's full of museums and kind of secret areas and that have lots of interesting kind of unknown stories that were part of it. And so I started doing all these public events and performances and installations that were kind of activating these social histories. And since doing work in San Diego, I've continued doing public projects with a similar spirit in Seattle and DC.
similar spirit, like because you did a major, huge one for the new Seattle Convention Center.
Yeah.
Can you tell the listeners more about that?
Yeah, so the convention center, this massive like $2.2 billion building that's in downtown Seattle, and they were funding commissions basically as part of this new building. And so because they were creating this new building, they were destroying some existing public artwork. And so I was commissioned by For Culture to somehow interpret the histories of these existing artworks. And I kind of negotiated, like, wouldn't it be interesting if we could expand the storytelling to honor the work of these artists from the 60s and 70s who were doing public artwork at this site, which included Marin Hassinger and Jack Mackey and Alice Adams and Maggie Smith and Judith Roach, but then to also touch on other moments of time of other beings that have left a material trace at this one city block. And so I expanded it about 30,000 years back. And so this is a sculpture that's 14 different moments of time. And so it was working with artifacts and embedding them in large blocks of resin to tell those different periods, those different stories, kind of through having the objects like floating in these kind of bubbling, colorful sculptures.
And so, like an archaeologist, you were given these objects that were being excavated for the ground, I mean,
Yeah.
for the
So
construction site.
yes, so I knew I would salvage some of the materials from the past artworks. And then while we were doing that, the construction crew discovered all of these other artifacts when they were excavating the building foundation. And I was like, ooh, can I use those? And
Yeah.
it triggered this really interesting conversation because they said, okay, well, first we have to bring in the archaeologists because that's the wave. The construction worker is like the first responder of artifacts. Um, and then the archaeologists come in and they work side by side with the construction workers excavator that like scrapes
Yeah.
things away in the mud. And then, so what they found, it was a well or a privy from the 1890s. So people probably got a sewage system. And so then we're like, oh, we'll just, hey, we've got this on-site dump now. And so it was shoes and bones and bottles and peach pits and toys and teapots and all kinds of things. And the archaeologists said, we kind of have this stuff already, so go ahead, do what you want with it.
Wow. Nice negotiating. Was that something that you had to make an addendum to like write on, or did you have to like
Yes.
be there on site and say, stop, I need this material?
Stop. No, they meticulously cleaned all of these objects that were covered in glacial mud, and labeled them and put them in the little baggies, and then they were like, what are we going to do with them? They didn't know, but that's just the process you have to do by law. But ultimately, this is the interesting thing is if the archaeologists determine that it's not historically relevant, then the artifact, like the stewardship of the artifact, is on the property owner. The property owner is the one that says, okay, no, this is valuable, or no, throw it away again. So
Mm.
it's so relative because the other thing that's interesting, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on this, but I didn't know this, that if it's younger, if the object is younger than 50 years, you
Yeah.
don't have to bring in an archaeologist. And this was told to me by an archaeologist who was in retirement. So when she was starting, they were finding things from the WPA era and deeming that as waste because it was less than 50 years old. So basically, it's all relative, and bureaucracy can make treasures into garbage or garbage into treasures, depending who's behind the wheels. So it was my
Mm.
little glimmer into that. And it was great to work with these archaeologists at the Burke Museum. They were wonderful. And so I kind of got my pick of the objects that I included in the permanent installation. And so it was different moments of time. So since it was just this one sliver of time that they found with these objects from the 1890s, we had two different artworks from that. We had a laundry. There were census records that was a Chinese American run laundry
Mm.
at this site in downtown Seattle. And we found clothespins and um, buttons, and other archaeology sites similar found pipes and peanut shells because people often lived in their businesses too. So um, that was one of the pieces that we represented. And I worked with this Chinese American activist and historian, Betty Luke, whose family ran a laundry, to get her advice about how to represent this sculpture. And then we also had a horse stable that we represented in the sculpture from the 1890s. Because, man, horses at the turn of the century really was rough for them. I mean, imagine a city like Seattle or Chicago with like 40,000 horses in it.
Oh,
And they're being fed opiates because their bodies are running down because they're working so hard. And so I wanted to like have a memorial, like honoring moment for the working horses of early cities. So those were the artifacts we included in my sculpture. And the rest of the artifacts now are part of a teaching collection at the Burke Museum. So students get to work with them. We did have an installation for a few months at the Bellevue Art Museum where we included all of those artifacts pinned to a wall so you could see
yeah.
them all, but now students are working with them.
Oh, now okay. I have seen the one at the Bellevue Art Museum. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I know. It's coming around again
Yes.
when I get to meet you again. Wow. So, you were so careful with your words that those artifacts were meticulously
Yeah.
unearthed and like cleaned. How do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Well, in a way, I think when the objects are from the 1890s, I think about what would the people think who that happened with? Maybe they would find it funny. Would I find it funny to be like, "Oh, my old shoe, I put in the garbage because it was filled with holes and I couldn't fix it." And now, 130 years later, there's this person that's being paid $80 an hour to clean it and then like air dry it. Like, okay, I don't know. It
Yeah.
seems kind of silly and interesting and like
Yes.
loving, you know?
Yeah.
So in that way, I like it. I think it's nice that um there's this care that we sometimes afford more to people in the past than we do ourselves in the present.
Mm, beautiful. Beautiful. Uh, are you surprised that they did not find any indigenous artifacts? Or
Well,
did
yeah,
they? Let's
that's
get
a
a little
great
political,
question.
maybe. I don't know.
Um, well, the soil in Seattle has been so disturbed.
Mm,
Because it used to be even hillier here. So it was like they carved away so much of it that any pre-contact objects have been like scrubbed from downtown Seattle.
mm,
However, there were plenty of, early urban Native Americans in Seattle, but they were using, Worcestershire bottles in the same way anybody else was. So it's like we don't know who is wearing those shoes
oh, yeah.
or any, drinking from that teapot.
Right.
It's like cultural identity was more communicated like through butchery types. So it was like, because there were some bones. So it was like, oh, if you're cutting the soup bones this way, you're probably like Polish American or, things like that.
So fascinating. Yeah, I didn't think about that particular aspect of it.
Right. And that was actually the reason why the Burke Museum was like, we've got this, because it was sort of like it was right at the dawning of like basically the Amazon moment, because everybody had Levi Strauss catalogs. So objects were becoming really like redundant at that moment. Everybody had the same teapots or bottles or, so it was there were family heirlooms that people would travel with, but
Wow.
yeah, things are becoming more homogeneous objects, daily life objects.
Yeah. And the production, industrial revolution, like in the production line. Yes. I have studied that through glass and
Right.
the production of glass and even like a butter dish. Like who has a nobody had a butter dish until they became mass produced and then
Yes.
somewhat quote unquote affordable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the predominant material, glass, that was found because it also obviously weathers pretty well.
Did you have to apply for the commission or did they seek you out?
I had to apply.
Okay.
Yeah. So you submit your portfolio and you get interviewed and the whole thing.
And then you were stipend.
They had like a set chunk of money for to pay for the commission, and then you take 10 to 20% of it for your pay.
Oh, did you have to provide all the budget and
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Which goes back to what I was saying of like, oh, now all of a sudden I'm a small business owner and I didn't intend that.
Yeah. I did you go to art school?
Yeah.
You did. Where'd
Not
you
like I learned about running a business there.
This is exactly right. And for those emerging artists that are listening and watching, like there's so many things that are wrong with art school.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask what seems like the embarrassing practical questions because that's what can is really helpful. There's nothing, it's like we all need to know how to pay taxes or I don't know, put together budgets.
Put together budgets. Like I think there's ways to be creative. I was just gonna go off on a little bit of a tangent, like, you know, a lot of people think that money is what makes the world go round, but to me it's creativity.
Mm.
Creativity is what sparks and there's a way to be creative with your budgets, but the artists need to have some economic background and some education and not be afraid to ask for the money to do it because it takes the creativity more than it does the money.
Yeah.
And it's okay to
Yeah.
ask for it.
Ex and to ask for help too, like we're so f focused on like the performance of professionalism or
Mm.
something. Like when, if someone gives you money, remember like with that first big commission, just feeling like, okay, now I have to pretend that I know exactly what I'm doing when I didn't. And asking for help, not being afraid to do that.
Yeah, because a lot of these contracts and amendments, like that's something that could be a template, but then as you negotiate, you're asking for things that are never going
Yes.
to be just like the contract before it.
Right.
Yeah. I love I love hearing that you negotiated that. I just think that artists need to be great negotiators, even if they don't know it all, but at least know that they can negotiate.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that people are starting to do more, this is specifically with public art commissions, I think is really good, is splitting your design contract from your fabrication contract,
Okay.
because that way you're not on the hook in one contract to go forward with making this thing that you promised. Um, because there's so much delay in public art and budget the costs change so much. So like with that, the convention center project, COVID happened
Yep.
and we had to find more money to pay for the project, but and luckily they were great. They were super supportive and helping with that. For Culture was, and my project manager, Kath Bruner, was amazing and very seasoned and an incredible advocate. But that's not always the case. And so I've had other projects same thing, COVID, inflation of cost, and then less understanding groups were like, well, sorry, that's on you. You signed this contract 4 years ago, and you have to come up with the same materials with the budget from 4 years ago.
Yeah. No, not going to happen, especially if you're using metal. Like the
Yes.
price of steel skyrocketed and bronze and every metal just skyrocketed during COVID. Yeah, my friend Shelly's her bid came back $100,000 more.
Yeah. I'm in that situation right now. And so now we're looking at theme park construction teams to build this sculpture because it would be cheaper for them than like a high-end like public art fabrication company, which makes me so sad. But that's just the situation that we're in.
That is fascinating. Theme park. So you're going to make something big.
Yeah,
Is
that's
this what you're talking about with the Venus sculpture?
no, but let's
Okay.
let's maybe if it works out with that company,
Yeah.
we could
O-
make our carousel with them too.
Okay.
No, this is for a sculpture that's going to be in a park in San Diego. It's going to be this like amphitheater that has shapes cut out of it that will make shadow drawings.
I love it. Subtractive space.
Exactly.
So neat. Oh my God. So you've got a public art practice, your studio. Do you work with galleries too?
I do. I don't have gallery representation, but I try to show a few times a year, like in Washington State mostly. The the artworks that I'm making parallel to my public art.
So you do some Venus sculptures. Are you
Yes.
making those out of ceramic or do you make them all media?
Yeah, I've made them out of most recently ceramic. I've made them out of resin. I've made them out of butter
Get out of
and glycerin. But yeah, mostly ceramic.
here. Okay. Wow. And so you're sculpting them or you have a mold?
Mold.
Okay.
We also made Halloween masks out of
What?
them. Yeah, that was fun. I'll send you a picture of them. But
Okay. That would be
um,
amazing.
yeah, but I love to work in ceramics. I've been working in ceramics for a long time now. And it's just such a nice, squishy material to play with. That works well, I think, particularly when you're rendering the pendulous forms of the Venus of Willendorf,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
all those squishy people.
The full expressions. Yeah. The dynamic happenings that happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you. We are at our time when you and I decided that would be good for us. And so I just wanted to thank you for bringing us into your studio, into your world. And I can't wait to see what you do. And I cannot wait to do a project with you.
Likewise, it's been such a thrill to talk with you. I feel very energized right now, and I'm so honored to be able to join your conversations and crew.